Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fashion seminar of Fashion in Helsinki 2021. My name is Ervin Latimer. I'm a fashion designer, writer, and managing editor of Ruskeat Tytöt, Finland's first for people of color, by people of color media and platform. I'm also one of the founding members of a new initiative called Nordic Fashion Directory, which aims to solve some of the issues that people of color face in the industry in the Nordics. In the second part of the seminar, we're reflecting on representation and inclusivity in the fashion industry. And I've had a series of talks with several designers, and I have a massive honor to have in the last discussion as a guest, Mr. Rick Owens. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Very, very delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm very thankful. I'm sure you have quite a busy schedule, so really thankful that you had the time to sit down with us.
No, it's Saturday night. I'm in the middle of the country in Concordia. I have nothing. I'm fine.
You're trapped with me now for a while.
I am. I'm delighted.
So I'm just gonna get right into it. For your SS20 collection, specifically the women's collection, it was devoted to your mother, who is Mexican, and it was named after your grandmother, after her Mixtec maiden name. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
you mentioned in the press notes that this was sort of the first time that you were exploring your own Mixtec heritage and your own Mexicanness due to the border wall discussion in the US. What I'm curious to hear, was this the first time that you explored your Mexican heritage in your collections, or have there been instances in one way or another that has happened before?
I think it was the first time, and to be honest, it just hadn't occurred to me before. I'm assuming that I have been influenced by things that I've seen as I was being raised. So I just thought it was I thought I would make a concerted effort to explore the influences that I could look back on. So this collection, and you know, there weren't, I thought, I didn't want to paint, I didn't want to work with Mexican cliches. I was thinking of what I remembered personally about any kind of Mexican influence. And one of the triggers for me, I mean, of course, it was the wall discussion with Trump, and I thought, you know, I'm in a position to cast a vote and to kind of say something, and I think I should. But besides, the other trigger was I had gone to the Guggenheim in Venice, and they had this wonderful Joseph and Annie Albers show, and it was after the Bauhaus, when they were touring Mexico, and they were responding to Mexican pyramids in their work and hieroglyphics, and that mix of ancient and complete modernism, that was kind of exactly the direction that I'm always trying to go in, and that was a real motivator. But no, I hadn't literally explored it. But this was an exercise that I gave myself for this collection, to actually list and kind of come up with my own personal composition of the influences that I remembered. The funny thing is that there was this comic book. My father used to work for the welfare department, and he was a social worker, and so he would go to people's houses and interview them to see if they qualified for benefits. So social consciousness was big in my house. It was very prominent, and but the irony is that I feel like it kind of, in my father, he after years of this, he became a little bit embittered because obviously he was dealing with a lot of people who were trying to get away with things for benefits, who were I mean, just in his job, he was going to run into people who were going to take advantage of the system, and so
Mm-hmm.
that kind of clouded his perspective, and I think it kind of embittered him a- after a while. He was already kind of bitter, but he became even more skeptical, and mistrustful, as he got older. But anyway, um, and my mom, it was a pretty uh, provincial American small town where I was being raised, and there wasn't really a Latino community except maybe for the migrant farm workers
Mm.
that Dad would. At his other job was he was a translator for the court system, and so he would defend farmer workers' rights,
Mm.
because as a translator, and um, but somehow that was never a world. Uh, I don't think I don't think we knew any migrant workers. I think later on, the migrant workers' children would start going to the schools that I was going to, and Mom would help as a teacher's aide with them. Um, but the way it started was Mom didn't know English when Dad married her, and he was an English teacher in Mexico, and so they eloped and they came to Porterville, California, and Mom, when she started taking me to school, Spanish was my first language, and when she
Mm.
started taking me to school in kindergarten, I learned English, and she learned English at the same time. She would
Mm.
stay and she would help the teacher,
That's a
and she
nice thing
ended.
that you have together then, I guess.
Isn't that the cutest thing? But the other
Yeah.
cute thing is Mom comes from a very traditional Catholic family. So for her to elope, she was one of 6 children in her family. For her to elope was the most radical, extreme thing possible. And Mom was not a radical, extreme person. She's very mild and gentle and thoughtful. But somehow she just had the guts to take this leap, and she did. And nobody, the rest of her family lives within a few blocks of each other still in Puebla, Mexico. She was the only one to leave and do this. So anyway, um, so she took me to school. She was learning English. She became a teacher's aide. She retired like 30 years later with full benefits. I mean, without having gone to school for this, she just kind of insinuated herself um, into this position and just found her way, which is um, kind of impressive. I mean, very impressive for a sweet, mild Catholic lady. Um,
Uh, yeah, you mentioned memories, and I remember I was watching an interview of you that you did with the New York Times. You mentioned that you use a lot of mood boards, that you don't like visually having the image in front of you, that you prefer to kind of use your memory and do your interpretation of that. And I wonder like how was that process with that collection? Because like you said, often things can be quite literal. I think in fashion, if someone has a specific heritage and that is in a collection, we sort of expect it to be very literally like a print from an indigenous people or something like that. And I think it's fascinating when it's something else and not so literal. So I'm just sort of curious, like for you, how did it go with sort of like, because I'm sure there were new aspects that you were sort of looking for, but not having like those, like when I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself well well enough, but that's sort of like memories mixing maybe with like wishes, etc. Like how did that work in the creative process?
um, well, it was actually very literal. I mean, I just um, I had been like, when I started telling you about my parents, I had been on my way to this, to a point, and I got a little sidetracked. Um, since my dad was interpreting in the court for migrant workers' rights, he used to read this comic book called Super Machos,
Mm,
and it was a vulgar, um, a comic like for adults. It was kind of like an adult comic. I mean, there wasn't really nudity or sex, but it was kind of vulgar, but it was very political, and it was targeted for migrant workers.
mm,
Uh, and he used to have it around the house, and mom hated it because she just thought it was, the humor was, um, she felt that the humor was too raunchy and that it was in bad taste, and it was not the Mexican heritage that she wanted to have around the house.
mm,
But dad, his reason for reading it, he said, was, first of all, as sophisticated as he was, he did have a very crude sense of humor. Um, but besides that, he thought he wanted to be as up to date with contemporary, Mexican, colloquialisms or slang, so that he could understand his clients better, which is a
mm,
very, um, but I think it served two purposes. I mean, one, he always had very noble intentions, but on the other hand, he had a very crude sense of humor, and he was, very intolerant.
mm,
So he was this weird mix of social consciousness and kindness, but then extreme bigotry.
mm,
And it was the weirdest. I mean,
mm,
it's kind of a very weird background to come from. Anyway, so then when I was doing this collection, I reached out to this magazine, this Super Machos comic book,
mm,
um, because I wanted to use them as prints. Because the prints, the drawings um, are of a community, a small Mexican community in Mexico, a very poor Mexican community, and I just liked the imagery, and that was one of the memories that I wanted to
mm,
capture in this collection, and that was
mm,
part of my Mexican heritage, which was, very personal, but kind of said a lot about me, and it was not your usual reference, not your usual Mexican reference. And so I had to contact the estate, and it was run by, the artist's daughter, the, um, cartoonist's daughter. And, I told her about how I knew about this comic and how it had been part of my Mexicanness when I was being raised, and how I wanted to use an image, for a print. And she refused me because she was saying that she wanted to protect her father's legacy, and his um, aim had been to help a marginalized community, um, of poor people, and she didn't think it was appropriate that that artwork be used on expensive clothes on a runway in Paris
mm,
to be bought by rich people.
mm,
Um, so we entered this dialogue, these emails, because I tried to persuade her that my intentions were, um, she said, if you want to honor my father's legacy, buy one of his books and read it. And I said, I get what you're saying, but what if I expose your father's legacy to a whole other audience that had never heard of him, that might, become aware of him? I can understand the whole rich people thing, but doesn't that kind of make it worth it? And,
It's also, it's very personal and specific for you, right? It's
it,
not like you
it, it
just
is.
saw it and thought that that's cool. It has a very specific connection in your sort of story.
That's what I was hoping would convince her, that it was personal, and that it wasn't, yeah, that it wasn't just, appropriation. That that it was my personal story. But yeah, it never worked. She never said yes. And
Hmm.
but I just thought it was a poignant conversation. Kind of it was um, anyway. That was a funny little aside of that collection.
No, absolutely. No, that's an interest. And there's, yeah, and that's maybe what I mean. I think this example of this comic book is exactly what I meant, that, things don't have to be so literal. Like it can be something like that, that's very specific to the designer, where that sort of connection to where you come from comes. And I think often, at least for me, I make mixed race too. And I think for many mixed race designers, there always comes that point at some point, earlier or later, where you kind of get curious about your heritage and you kind of get that moment. For one reason, like it might change what triggers it, but at some point, I feel like that often comes. At
Mm.
least it came for me. Like during my studies, I realized that there's a side of my father that I never explored. And I thought for me, fashion was like the right way to do that, and like the right way to find out, first in the US and then further like in Africa, where my family is and where they're from. Um, I'm curious, would you, do you think that earlier in your career, like in the 90s, you opened your first store in 94 in LA, I think?
Well, I just had a studio, and it wasn't a store. I mean, it was
Oh,
very,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well,
And I feel like it was 98, but I don't remember.
okay.
So
But regardless, sort of at the turn of the millennia, in the US specifically, it's kind of a delicious idea to like kind of combine Mexicanness to the idea of luxury and the sort of raw luxury that you're doing. Do you think that the time would have been ripe in the US, like at that time, to sort of insert those ideas, like, or present preferences that relate to Mexicanness? Do you know what I mean?
well, I didn't. I mean,
Yeah.
I was I didn't think anything that I was doing was particularly Mexican.
Hmm.
I was just following a tradition. There was anything Mexican to it, it might have been a tradition of like some kind of raw minimalism, like Luis Barragan
Hmm.
architecture, or um, um, yeah, I can't think of anything else that at the moment, at that time,
Yeah.
might have been an influence. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So moving on a little bit, I mean, in general, words like inclusivity and representation that are at the topic of this conversation too are obviously, words that the, industry is finally using, and we have real discussions about these things. Do you, I mean, you've been operating from Paris with your brand for a long time now. Have you noticed like a shift? Have you noticed that there maybe is like this moment coming where we can actually have these types of conversations about inclusivity and representation that might actually lead to real change in the industry? Have you noticed that there is like a change in the air in any way?
Well, I mean, the conversation is ubiquitous. I don't know if it's going to really come to anything. I mean, the world is
Hmm.
not a fair place. You know, I remember there were two. The best advice that I ever got, there were from two people, and both times I was kind of frustrated and wound up and feeling in a corner, and both times they said something to me that set me on fire, that made my blood boil and made my face red, and I can still remember that sensation of just rage.
Hmm.
um, One was, it was a work thing, and I was being overwhelmed, and it was a friend of mine, um, uh, kind of an evil friend, and I
That
was
can
just
be
going,
good.
yeah, and I was just going, you know, I can't. I'm like, this is too much for me. And he was going, and he goes, wow, get over yourself.
Hmm.
And I just flushed and my blood boiled and I was so angry. And but I'll always remember that. And he was right. I'll just remember whenever I take things a little too seriously, I just remember that phrase, and it just really helps me. The other time was my father. It was another situation where I was feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and frustrated about something. And he goes, you know, Richard, life isn't fair.
Mm.
And my blood boiled. I felt rage, and then I remembered it forever. And like, yeah, he's absolutely right. Um, And when I think about being marginalized, because my marginalization was not about race, mine was
Mm.
about sexuality, because I was a very delicate, sensitive, feminine boy in a very provincial town. And it was brutal. It was really brutal the way that people behaved to me. And also my father. My father was very. He was a bully. Yeah, and but not only with bigotry, but intellectually, he was just kind of an intellectual bully, and he would challenge me a lot intellectually, and kind of talk me into corners that I couldn't get out of, and because he was just so much more powerful than me intellectually. So.
Mm.
Um, and then when I look back, I'm thinking there was a lot of rage, and and that rage has served me well. I
Mm.
feel like everything that I have done has been a fuck you to both of, or like that any of those situations. It has been my reaction to my father. It's been my reaction to being oppressed. Um, and I wonder where I would be without that rage.
Mm.
It served an amazing purpose. If I had been respected, treated well, treated gently, what would I have to spark me? Um, is there a place in the world for this kind of energy, for this kind of conversation? My other example, when I'm thinking about life isn't fair, I'm thinking, we're talking about people behaving better towards each other. Um, and um, I wonder if there is a sense of entitlement to this current generation, because we have so much luxury. We have so much information at our fingertips that we never had before. We have
Mm.
all the information that we need. Um, we have access to it. And that was never the case before, um, which is the biggest luxury of all, information.
Mm. Mm.
Um, but I don't know how comfortable we should expect to be.
Mm.
Um, I think uh, the example that I was going to use is like that I always say is like, with everything that we've learned how to go to the moon and everything, but we haven't found a way to make our shit not stink. So
Mm.
there are just some fundamental ugly truths in the world that we're never going to eliminate.
Mm.
Greed, corruption, vanity, ego, all of these are necessary evils, I suppose, or I don't know if they're necessary, but they're there and they're not going away. Um, and how you negotiate through all of that
Mm.
is what creates an honorable life. Sure, I'm all for people behaving better towards each other, but I don't have high hopes. And we're going through a wave where there's a lot of pointing, and a lot of stone throwing. Um, I feel like it's going to settle into place in it may be a different way than we thought it might. Maybe more understanding of crude instincts. I don't know. I haven't figured this out. I haven't figured it out.
Well, it's fair to admit there's a lot to figure out when it comes to,
Yeah.
inclusivity and questions about representation in the industry. I think we definitely are, in this moment where we're still actually trying to figure out how to even talk about these things. And I think what your example about sort of like pointing fingers kind of relates to that I think we're still, I think there may be this moment of recognition of certain structures that, like, at least I think a younger generation now is.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
I did a show about 6 years ago, I think, that had Black step teams from Washington, from the States, come and wear the clothes, and they did a show. I knew that I was playing with some delicate ideas. I knew that it could go wrong. I knew that I was toying with appropriation or with I knew that it was tricky. I read somewhere like Pyre Moss. I don't know. Do you know that guy? Do you know? It's some. I'm not really that familiar. I read some interview where somebody asked him if they thought that I should have done that show, and he said no, that I shouldn't have. At the time, it was um, at the time. I think it worked. I know that the response was very positive. Um, but I don't know. I don't know if it really did. And do you think I should have done it, or do you think I shouldn't have done it?
I
don't
guess
know
I'm
if you,
giving the definitive answer here now, right?
I don't, well, no, you're not. You're just giving one opinion, but I don't know if you know the show that I'm talking about.
I think
Yeah.
it's, I think I would have to like remind myself again. It's like with is it black female dancers mostly? I think I've seen it. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I would have to like understand better what it was intended to be about.
Okay, well, here's another thing then. It hasn't irreparably damaged me because you're still talking to me, and
Yes, I am.
Uh, it hasn't given me some weird kind of reputation, but maybe it has. I don't know. And to this day, I wonder. When I look at that show, I personally think it's a really beautiful show, and I think it came out really great, and it really hit all of the buttons that I wanted it to. But I get it. I'm like, should a white man, and am I white? I don't know. I don't know if I'm that white.
Yeah, I mean, and these are the big questions. I mean, yeah, like how, and I think we're also in this moment of like semantics, and like I said, we're like learning how to talk about things and learning how to talk about ourselves, and that's that's its own process. And yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to.
No, that was my question to you. Anyway, watch the show after this, and then send me an email and like tell me if you think I should have done it or not.
Okay, we'll have like a part 2 of this discussion.
Yeah.
Email. That's great. We'll do. Okay, we're wrapping up. We're recording this interview now a day after the Aalto University graduate show. The graduate, both bachelors and masters, streamed their graduate collections. Just as like a final thing, these young students, they're now doing their first internships, maybe their first jobs, maybe some of them want to start their own brands. And, for many of them, especially the ones who might be from a marginalized background, creativity and what they do now is that sort of sole source of power that they have, that sort of maybe they have that similar, I mean, for you, it was that rage that you mentioned, and whatever they have, it's that driving force. What advice would you have for them to sort of ensure that they kind of stay true to themselves and kind of keep pushing forward with what they have?
Well, okay, first thing, don't expect too much. When I started, I thought I was going to be Charles James and living in squalor, doing beautiful things in Hollywood Boulevard, and that was fine. That was all I wanted. I wanted to be um, my my strategy was to work, produce, edit. The more you make and the more you throw away and the more you edit, you find your voice. The more stuff you make, um, the more you have to choose from, narrow it down to who you really are. That's how you find yourself. You just make, produce, and that let that be enough. You know, you can find a way to survive, but if you really want to be truthful, and if you, I mean, this would have worked for me. I mean, I was okay with being poor. I mean, I don't really need a lot of stuff. Well, I do now because I'm spoiled. But then I was a little bit more pure. So there's that. Don't expect, um, especially now because the calendar, the fashion calendar, is so oversaturated. I mean, you really have to bring a lot. I would be very intimidated. When I started, I had a little bit of clear space around me for people to register who I was. I don't know how you do that now. um, even if you like put an outfit on the biggest pop star in the universe, it lasts for 1 second. It's not going to do you any good. So I really don't know how you make that kind of impact now. um, is that advice?
No, I guess it's scaled expectations is what I would call it. No, but truly, I think, yeah, I think that's advice. I think that's, there, yeah, I often actually think about what you mentioned about like how do you make a splash in this time where literally everyone has the tools to make a splash and be known. So that, I guess that is for them and for me and anyone in that position to figure out.
Yeah, you just have to really love it and let that be enough.
Yeah.
You know, if anything goes further than that, then it's icing on the cake. But you have to really love what you're doing, and plan on just being fulfilled by that. Um, the other advice that my father gave me that was really good was, um, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And I kind of live by that too.
Yeah. I think that's quite simple, but quite effective, honestly. Gets you quite far.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of got it all. It's got um, aspiration, it's got anticipation, but it's practical. It's super practical. Um, yeah, it's hard to see anything new now. There is so much clutter. It's
There's a lot of clothing, but not a lot of fashion, I would say, at least.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of good ideas out there that but it's just kind of coming at you so fast. You can't really
Mhm.
say, you can't savor it and enjoy it. But this is, you know, I'm going to be 60, and when I think back, um, you know, the news on TV, it never had all of the banners on it, because people then you this generation has just learned to absorb layers of information. And
Mm.
you know, on Instagram, you can scan something in a second, and it's like Egyptian hieroglyphics. It's kind of symbols. It's not even words. It's like, you know, you see a pyramid, a palm tree, and a camel, and you've got the story figured out. And that's kind of the way it is with Instagram. So and it's kind of great because it's like, it's futuristic, but it's also very primitive at the same time.
True.
And you're using primal instincts to get a message or to tell a message. Um, so for somebody like me, I don't even, maybe I don't even recognize what's good anymore, because this new generation is with all of the layers of understanding that they have, they're perceiving things in such a different way than probably I am. So there's going to be a new level of perception, and people will just, um, it's evolution. They will adapt.
Absolutely. Rick Owens, thank you so much for taking this time to have this talk with me. It was a real pleasure to have you here, and I will get back to you regarding that email. Thank you so much, and take care.
All right. You too. Bye.
Bye.